All right, this is your stock market recap for Wednesday, June 11th. I'm going to try to keep this a little bit shorter than the other ones this week because I just put a pizza in the oven. So we'll see if we can get through this recap quick or if I'm having burnt pizza for dinner. All right, starting with the indexes, QQQ, higher highs, higher lows, closed slightly down 0.3%, but still above the 5-day EMA. We've got this gap where the 10-day moving average is coming to the top part of it now. Any kind of pullback in that area, I would still consider healthy. Even pullback to the 20-day moving average, that would be all good. Really, just overall strong market. SPY, similar action, down 0.3%, but higher highs, higher lows, and a close over the 5-day moving average. IWO, a little bit of weakness today, down 0.3%, but the fourth close above the 200-day moving average and third above the support gap. You now have the 5-day moving average moving over the 200, which is starting to build that support there. And ARKK, very strong. Once again, up 0.9%, higher highs, higher lows, unfilled gap to the upside. Any pullback to this gap zone where we had the highest volume close on the 6th, that 10-day moving average catches up, that would be a nice higher low pullback entry to get some exposure into a little bit more risk on ETF. And then Bitcoin, not doing anything wrong, continues to trend above the 5-day moving average. Couple days tightening up here, and you could see an explosive move to new highs. Taking a look at the 9 liquid leaders, we'll sort it by percent change today. I did make one change. I took out Netflix, which not doing anything wrong today, up 1.4%, back at the 10-day moving average after yesterday's shakeout under the 20-day and the support gap. So the fact that I'm taking Netflix off for a different stock just shows you how strong the market is and how strong this stock SMR is. SMR, leader of the nuclear energy stocks, beautiful double bottom base. Broke out on earnings up, what was that, 21%, traded tight above the 5-day EMA. Two more kind of breakout days, pull back into the HVC 10-day moving average, and then we continue to follow through to the upside. Another stock that had a red candle close above the 5-day moving average, followed by a gap up in continuation to the upside. That's one of the signs that we're in a strong market is when you have these kind of reversals and ugly closes. If you follow it up with a gap up, that's usually a nice entry point on an opening range break there versus the close of the previous day or the low of the previous day. Fortunately, I didn't add to the position here, but nicely acting today, up 20.5%. GEV, picture perfect action off the 20-day EMA and the support gap. Higher low today, higher highs, close back over the 5 and the 10-day moving average. This is the type of action that you see out of leading stocks in a strong market. Robinhood today closed the gap down from the S&P inclusion snub. I like that because I bought it on Monday on the undercut of the 10-day moving average. Now right near highs, um, closed at a new high. Any pullback here to the 20-day moving average and support gap, that's a spot that I want to be really aggressive sizing into the position. Palantir made new highs today with a gap up, closing the only resistance gap on the way through that area. Great action. Another stock that you see an ugly bar where we close under the 20-day moving average on volume, down 7.8% on the 5th. And what do? We follow it up with a gap up and then follow through the rest of the next 4 candles. Very strong action and very similar action you'll see out of market leaders is this shakeout under the 20-day moving average, followed by an unfilled gap up. Go through all the previous leaders and all their up cycles. You'll see this constantly. Roblox, we had a gap down on Monday. We've since closed that gap. The quicker you close gap downs, the stronger the stock and the stronger the market is. And it only took us 2 days. And we did it with a gap up and strong close over the 5-day moving average. New highs for Roblox. CrowdStrike, higher highs, higher lows, closing into the resistance gap after that earnings gap down. Pull back to the 20-day moving average and support gap is a spot that I'm watching. Zscaler, holding the 5-day EMA, holding the support gap on this pullback. This is the type of tight action that you see out of liquid leaders that just surf the 5-day moving average, even coming back into the 10-day. and this kind of secondary high volume close area at 293 would be perfectly healthy. That could actually be a spot for a potential add or entry. Carvana holding the 10-day EMA, holding the support gap on the pullback, not doing anything wrong, no gap downs. CRWV, I tried to take this on the opening range break to the upside. Got through both of these resistance gaps. I thought we were going to have another 20% candle, and then it reversed. Once it took out my entry, I sold it for a small loss and actually flipped short for an intraday, just kind of short as it came back into the 5-day moving average. But we closed strong back over the 5-day, and now this is actually setting up for, I mean, potential to break out to the upside. Nice flag above the 5-day moving average. Going to the daily recap, a couple themes that I wanted to focus on was quantum, QUBT. I had an awesome short on this yesterday. We had a gap down zone that uppercut just by a couple cents. We immediately responded to it. Because we're in such a strong environment, I don't like to hold shorts overnight. So thankfully, I closed about 85% of that position. And then got stopped out on the rest today through yesterday's high. Really strong action of 25%. And kind of looks like this stock is ready to run into this gap zone to test that. RGTI, a little bit weaker. We did have a nice gap up today, but we uppercut this resistance gap and failed to close above it or within it. So one thing that I'm looking for here is, can we close above it tomorrow, just like QUBT did? That would be a sign of strength. Or do we see a lower high and then this start to roll back down? IONQ, similar to RGTI, uppercut the resistance gap, close below, just relative weakness there. And then QBTS down 2.5%, closed under the HVC, but still kind of flagging out here, not doing anything too wrong. Just a little bit weaker closing ranges out of the quantum names today, except for the most, like in my mind, the most risky is QUBT, which closed the strongest. But the real theme today to talk about was nuclear. We already covered SMR, adding that to the leaders list. OKLO, another stock in that group, up 29.5% today. It did have an offering after hours. So what are we trading at? I mean, we're only down to 64.50. Not bad at all. 64.50, right around here. So really strong, great action, shows the strength of the theme. NNE, another stock within that group, not a leader in my eyes, just kind of a secondary name, but you see strength in secondary names when you have a theme that starts to work really well. CCJ, ugly day yesterday with a gap down and test of the 5-day moving average, but we did get a gap up and strong close, still not over the HVC, and we did kind of test this gap down and failed there, so we'll switch that now to a resistance gap. A close over that area would be ideal. SFM, this was supposed to be in the next group. We have a couple of resistance and failures that I wanted to talk about. BTSG, this was the nice clean setup that we covered yesterday. Just wanted to cover again that we're following through to the downside now. So on these thinner names, when you're trying to trade a pivot breakout, if you don't get traction right away and you see the stock reverse on you, don't think that this is just a strong market and it'll come right back, because I mean, BTSG had about a 25% pullback after that breakout failure. So if you're going to be trading thinner names, make sure you get your stop to break even relatively quickly and don't fight against kind of a midday reversal there. SFM, this was a stock that has a massive rally, $22 to $175. Broke out of this base on June 2nd, and since then we've only seen distribution, 3 gap downs, and now we closed below the 50-day moving average for a second day and the support gap. It really starts to look like a failed breakout, but as long as we hold this support gap on a closing basis, this could just be a higher low, and then we'll set up in a couple weeks. From the short watch list yesterday, RR again followed through to the downside. We're now eating into this support gap here. This was the weakest of the robotic names, and it's literally the first short setup that we actually saw traction to the downside. So we're going to see how this plays out, but lots of volume, churning at this resistance gap. You can see a volume pickup there without any price progress, which is not usually a good sign. And we resolved to the downside. And then the last group I wanted to talk about was aerospace and defense. We saw a lot of these stocks come into the 20-day moving average and support gaps and hold today. DRS undercut the 20-day and the support gap high, immediately responded, end of the day up 2.6%. HWM, didn't have this all charted up, but there's a gap zone right there that we undercut the 20-day and that gap zone low, rallied up to the 10-day. And finally, KTOS. I should have been all over this. This is actually one that I absolutely missed, and pretty upset about that because we had a perfect test of the 20-day, first test since new highs. And then if you go on a 5-minute chart, actually, let's even go to like a 1-minute chart to really nail down this. It was the perfect undercut and rally attempt. We had a morning sell off that got into the gap zone. We had a mini bounce, and then we took out the support gap low on the highest volume, except for the opening bar. And when you get a reclaim of that area after a high volume shakeout, you can get a really tight entry by just buying through a break over the previous minute bars high, buy over the reclaim of the support gap low, and then your stop would be the low of the day. Picture perfect intraday chart on these support gap undercut and reclaim, and it was in a leading theme, ITA, which we'll cover in a second here. And I just wasn't ready for it. I think I was trading CRWV at the time and missed out on that. Next, we'll go to the ETFs. We're making great time today. I think my pizza's not going to burn. NLR, obviously the leading theme, nuclear and uranium stocks. Gap up off the 10-day test yesterday, strong close at new highs. I do have a position in some of my like longer term accounts in this group. XOP, strong action. Again, we're starting to see rotation into other energy groups, XOP, XLE, TAN. So really emerging right now is the energy theme. If you're not focused on energy names, there's 4 different groups within that energy sector that are showing relative strength. Probably should get on some of the leaders there. Wanted to cover ITA because we talked about this as a leading group in the market. Had this kind of frozen rope where we just traced over the 5-day moving average. When you break a frozen rope pattern like that, you typically do get a lot of volatility. But thankfully, we had volatile action to the 20-day and then an immediate response to that level, close back above the 5-day moving average. This is the type of shakeout after a frozen rope that you want to see this overall trend continue. Could take a couple days to kind of base here, but overall, this is the type of response that you want to see on a shakeout. Semiconductors, kind of flat day today, not anything bad. ITB, this is the home builders ETF. Thought this was getting going yesterday. It was the leading group that we covered. Gapped up, so good sign of strength in the morning, but we uppercut the resistance gap, sell off through the rest of the day, ending the day down 1.7%. Next, we'll go to some long setups. First, we'll go with HSAI. This was on my watch list for an undercut of the 20-day, undercut of the support gap low. We didn't quite undercut the support gap low, so I didn't take it at that area. Unfortunate for me because we had a nice reversal, very strong close. But now we have this kind of 2-day pivot just through today's highs or Monday's highs as a potential entry. And then I would just use my stop at whatever the low yesterday is. This is kind of a name that once it gets going, it can get going, but you notice a lot of wicks in this chart. So kind of similar to the BTSG, it's a little bit thinner. So if you don't get immediate traction in this market, I'm just going to be throwing it back and going on to the next trade. HUT, I don't have this all charted up, but stock that I want to be focused on with crypto starting to work again, Bitcoin right at all-time highs. This stock, 3 red candle closes on declining volume above the 5-day moving average. An opening range break or a break over today's high is a potential entry versus that 5-day moving average. This is a stock that when it does get going, it can really rip 11 to $30, a triple right there. So uh, kind of just thinking risk on. We're in a risk on market. This is a stock that exhibits very strong behavior in a risk on market. As long as we can get a tight entry, we can try it. EVLV, another kind of crypto name, closed above the HVC here. This is a name that we've been watching for a little bit. I want to see this on a undercut of the 20-day moving average and the support gap, and then just play that with a stop under the previous low here. QBTS, going back to the quantum names, I still think this is the leader. QUBT has been acting really well recently, but QBTS didn't correct as much as QUBT did. Had this kind of double bottom base with the higher second pullback, which makes it not quite a double bottom base textbook wise, but strong action in the 5-day, rallied up here. Now we're just trading sideways with the 20-day moving average catching up. A couple of different ways to play this is if we undercut and reclaim the 20-day, that's an entry versus the pullback lows. Or if we gap up, take out today's high, a stop at today's low is how I'm going to be playing that. Toast, another name that we've talked about a lot. Double bottom base here, rallied into highs on earnings, came into the support gap 20-day EMA. That was the A plus kind of buy spot there. Since then, we've rallied up, still had some resistance. This is a name that I've always done better buying weakness versus strength. We now have this support gap. I'm looking for a higher low, but still an undercut of the support gap and the 10-day EMA. Reclaim that as a potential entry versus the 20-day EMA as my stop. Uber, we talked about this yesterday. Got hit with some sellers at the resistance gap on that gap up yesterday. Inside day today with the 20-day moving average, I'm looking for a higher low pullback into the secondary gap zone at $85 as a potential entry, just because it had some relative weakness here as we came back and retested this breakout. A little bit more of a shakeout here would be ideal to get the stock going again. Eat, one of my favorite stocks last year, just a pure uptrend over the 20-day EMA on the shakeout to the support gap back in September, one of my better trades last year. Now we're setting up again in a little bit later stage base. Uh, Ugly close under the 10-day moving average yesterday, followed by a gap up today. Now, if we retest that gap zone with the 20-day EMA catching up in a couple sessions, that's going to be a key spot. GEV, if we come back into the 20-day EMA and the support gap, that's an area to watch. NBIS, couple tight trading days above the 5-day moving average. Very little volume today. Opening range break tomorrow is buyable versus the 5-day moving average and support gap low. Or if we shake out the support gap, that's buyable versus the high volume close. Shopify, great action today, gap up. Did uppercut this resistance gap and kind of faltered there. Looking for a pullback into the 10-day moving average in this gap zone at 110.24. Snowflake, this has been on our watch list basically every day since I've started this. Still being patient, waiting for that 20-day EMA and the support gap undercut at $200. NVIDIA, a couple different areas to watch is the support gap at the 10-day EMA at 140 or the two gap zones at the 20-day moving average at 135. If we get back into the 20-day, a first test of the 20-day in this gap zone, that's the spot that I would really size up the position. CrowdStrike, pulling back in the 20-day moving average and support gap is the spot I'll be watching. MSTR, another crypto name, watching for a pullback into the gap zone at 375-ish area as a higher low, but still buying on weakness versus strength because this stock has had some relative weakness, has a resistance gap right here that we've seen sellers show up. So I want to have some cushion as we go into that zone so I can hold for a larger move instead of buying right there, a little bit lower probability of working. SMCI, a very risk on type semiconductor name that we've had some tight days here. Tried to get going today, but squatted, kind of similar to an OKLO or an SMR. Because we squatted here, an opening range break could be viable versus today's low. And this is another name. If it's going to go, it's going to go immediately. If it starts to work against you, you cut it as quickly as you can and keep your risk tight. Couple short setups to watch. QMCO. We had a rally day with the rest of quantum names, but we got hit at that gap down zone. We closed weak. We did have a slight gap up, but I'm just looking through a break under yesterday's low as a potential short there versus the 10-day EMA. WGS flagged into the 200-day moving average, still sitting on the support gap. I want to see a break through that support gap as my short stop at today's high. MMYT, we uppercut and failed at yesterday's gap down zone at the 5-day moving average. We continue to close into this last support gap. Another stock that's made a massive move is in the stage 3 topping phase. Breaking under today's low is the short versus today's high. SFM, I kind of want to see a small rally to this gap down zone, like a lower high here, and then we can start to drop down, but just wanted to put that on your radar. YETI, we rallied into this resistance gap on the tariff news, failed, closed under the gap up on Monday, now at the 5-day, or sorry, now at the 10-day moving average. A mini rally here, but a lower high, and then a roll would be the short. And then GEO, probably the short was today through yesterday's low. Overall, just relative weakness. We do have the 200-day and this gap zone. Kind of seems like these are acting as a magnet for this stock. All right, that is the recap for Wednesday, June 11th. If you guys enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I do these daily recaps every day, except for Fridays, and potentially not tomorrow. I'm flying tomorrow, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to get this out in time. Otherwise, Monday through Thursday, daily recaps, a full video on Saturday reviewing the previous week and preparing for the next week, and then a trading tips video on Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your night, and I'll see you guys in the next video.